Investment advisory services offered through Arca Investment Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor. The subject matter discussed here is provided for general information and educational purposes and is in no way intended as an investment advice, investment research, legal advice, tax advice, a research report, or a recommendation. Any decision to invest or take any other action with respect to any investments or strategies discussed in this series may involve risks not discussed, and therefore such decisions should not be based solely on the information presented. Please consult your own financial, legal, tax professional. This discussion is not a solicitation or an offer to sell securities or investment advisory services.
And welcome back to Connecting Nodes. If you recall, Connecting Nodes is about connecting the world of investors and builders. What are the founders of our future building today? What are they focused on? Where is the innovation going, and what potential new themes are forming? For investors, what does the world of digital assets look like, not only in today's time, but in 1, 3, 5, and 10 years? I'm joined by my colleague Michal. We look forward to sharing some more of our thoughts and observations from the world of venture capital and digital assets. And remember, again, this is educational. We are sharing our points of view. So Michal, if you could, lead us off. What's the happenings now in the last few weeks here, the last few months? There's things that are happening with Coinbase and Gemini, moving offshores, potentially USDC. Then I'll talk a little bit about the valuations that we're seeing right now. But kick us off. What's happening out there right now?
For sure, and you've kind of foreshadowed a little bit what I wanted to start off, because particularly those moves that we are seeing from some of the OG players in this space, particularly here, both Coinbase and Gemini being some of the oldest centralized exchanges that are very much set up onshore and here in the US specifically. They have made the headlines, both Coinbase last week and Gemini today, of essentially signaling their intentions to move offshore. Very much in the response to what we've already talked to on our last episode, which is the hostile regulatory environment. Some would even call it a crackdown. And that is particularly interesting because as we are looking at these VASPs, mainly the virtual asset service providers that both Coinbase and Gemini are categorized at, is that most of them historically have gravitated toward jurisdictions that provide greater clarity and specific guidance. That hasn't been necessarily the case in the recent months, weeks here in the United States, and that is very much a directional move by both of those industry leaders to ultimately position their businesses and position themselves for where they see future of growth in this space. Now, it is important, I would say, for twofolds. One very important element is they are moving to fill a very noticeable void in the derivative space. When you look at particularly the liquid markets, that has been left by the collapse and subsequent folding of FTX. That to date has not been very well, that void hasn't been particularly well filled. I know Binance has been predominantly one that has kind of hoovered up that liquidity, looking for a new home, but it hasn't been a very particularly well diversified market. So both Coinbase and Gemini are setting up offshore in these kind of offshore havens where they will both be able to structure those offerings accordingly. Now, second reason why I find this news particularly noteworthy is that this is a little bit of an out of character move. You have two entities that have been essentially the poster children for the regulatory engagement, being extremely transparent and treading water extremely carefully. Now essentially taking on moves that many of the years past would call unbecoming, especially moving into kind of offshore waters.
And one is publicly traded.
Indeed. And as such, I think it begs a lot of questions as to what is the future, and I think we'll talk a little bit more on this episode of the regulatory environment that I think seems to be the feature that will be coming back in months and weeks this year for sure. But perhaps I think importantly another element to kind of that I think caught a lot of headlines and is being widely discussed among the investor circles that we engage with is particularly the headwinds that USDC is facing, especially here stateside. but also globally, losing tremendous ground to Tether. What started as essentially a trickle of loss of confidence is now becoming a lot more significant. And so, just to give our listeners a perspective here, out of the $125 billion that is in stablecoins markets out there, USDC has specifically lost about 15% of its market dominance. I believe that's over $3 billion in just those 2 months when they lost the peg to a dollar. And so just to kind of rewind the clock, what ended up happening is for a very brief period of time, was essentially by what stretched out to about a week, there was uncertainty around the deposits backing the USDC that were held by Silicon Valley Bank. And so as Circle got caught in the crosshairs there, that unfortunately pushed for a DPAC to about 88 cents on a dollar. That a lot of arbitrageurs essentially moved in to close in that gap. But fundamentally, the trust was broken. And so that is an element that Circle is fighting very much against, both kind of proactively reaching out to their investors, but more importantly, running a series of educational campaigns as well as to how that trust is going to be restored and going forward. That has foundationally pretty important implications to USDC as like the go-to stablecoin vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that based off of some of the institutional backing that Circle has versus the always slightly it's kind of comical sometimes when you hear about the kind of the audits of Tether versus what you see in terms of the cap table of Circle? What would you say, from your experience, what do you know in terms of the cap table of Circle? I believe we have BlackRock and a number of other institutions there, correct?
That is correct, exactly. And the BlackRock relationship is particularly poignant here, as they're the ones managing quite a substantial chunk of that treasury, especially in kind of the sum of the treasuries and commercial paper that is underpinning USDC as a stable coin. So I would say certainly as far as the transparency goes, Circle, Jeremy and the team here have been extremely forthcoming when it comes to the actual holdings and also kind of terms of use, which oftentimes have been neglected by many of the users that popularly use USDC. There are very severe limitations that perhaps not a whole lot of users realize today. And those events of the last weeks essentially made it painfully clear that there is a time that Circle needs to essentially unwind some of those positions to cover that gap. And that time is very much a function of kind of the traditional capital markets where that traditional paper resides. And so it's very much we are in the process of speed running through the educational process as a result of the recent crises in this space, but one that is incredibly important because it will pave the way for additional innovation that we see, especially in stablecoins that up until very recently, many thought the battle was won either by USDC, if you kind of talk here Western Hemisphere, or Tether if you go over to Asia. But that isn't. I would essentially back to differ. There is a lot more innovations, it turns out, that can be done, and especially as we are starting to hear and see on the grounds in the emerging markets, they're coming up with like very innovative ways to introduce asset-backed stablecoins for very particular purposes of either trade, import-export, and many different exciting use cases we'll probably cover in the course of this year.
Yep. And just as an FYI for those listening, BlackRock's total AUM is north of $10 trillion. So not small, not really small at all. And so I'll leave it to you all to make your own opinions on that. But their entrance and their visibility on the cap table here and their visibility as a cog in the machine here, I think is one important to note. Moving on to other things that happened throughout the last month in terms of valuations and capital flows. And so throughout the month of April, there have been 54 deals, give or take, that have been announced and funded. And again, this is being drawn primarily through the Messari database from those at Dove Metrics. And so 54 deals have been funded, totaling around $630 million. And this is in comparison to last month, where we had about 71 deals, funded for a total of $770 million. So you're seeing a little bit of a deceleration. And as Michal pointed out, again, this regulatory overhang, what has happened over the last few weeks and months with the banking crisis, with some of the obviously congressional hearings, with some of the, dare I say, lack of clarity, even though others out there say that there is clarity, there is not, in our opinion, but we want there to be clarity. A lot of this is probably having a slowdown effect on capital deployment, here in the States at least. And so what we saw, seed deals, or about 22 seed deals that have been funded for about $102 million. Series A, the more mature ones out there, got about $117 million, and there were about 7 deals there. And Series B, there were 2 deals, and that was $180 million. And we're going to focus on this a little bit more. So infrastructure has been something that others have talked about over the last few months as one of the subsectors of digital assets venture that has garnered most of the attention. This is the picks and shovels, if you will. This is where you need to have the plugs, the APIs, the SDKs, all the things that make more of these platforms usable to the everyday person. And so infrastructure was the big winner so far this month in April of 15 deals totaling over $350 million. One of the big ones there is Layer Zero. They were able to get $120 million in their Series B at a valuation of $3 billion. So yet another unicorn in the space. And this is tripling its valuation from $135 million around in March of 22. So we are seeing some step ups here, as we've talked about before. Layer Zero, just as an FYI for those that are listening here and want to learn a little bit more, offers interoperability and cross-chain messaging infrastructure that allows decentralized applications and developers to reach multiple blockchains without the need for a middleman to facilitate the cross-chain interaction. Again, think of it as something as a very large bridge or bridges, and really focusing on that language and that ability to transfer messages across. As it's been quoted in CoinDesk and others out there, I think some of the founders have tried to come up with something a little bit more pithy and a little bit more easy to understand what Layer Zero is. In their opinion, Layer Zero is to blockchains what the internet was to computing clusters. Layer Zero allows chains not only to build bridges, as I said, kind of this transfer of assets and value between them, but send and execute arbitrary data just like a packet on the internet. Now, packets are more of a technical term. When you send information, when you send an email, when you send a text message, it's all in forms of packets that get delivered over different protocols. And this idea of packet transfer is really important, especially cross-chain or cross-protocol. And this is one of the things that Layer Zero is really at the forefront of. So again, big deal, a lot of money, big valuation. And so it is not all, kind of fire and brimstone, dare I say, crypto winter. Again, what we've seen in the early parts of 2018, some of the largest companies, more important companies like Fireblocks and OpenSea raised their seed rounds during what people thought was the end of crypto. And so we see, again, another example of a company able to raise a lot of money during what many people are saying is quite a dark period for this space. But why don't you kick us off on the regulation side? Why is MiCA such a big deal? What happened last week, and why do we think it's important?
For sure, and I think it feeds very nicely into some of the pullback that we have seen in deals consummated even in the course of last month, especially last quarter as well. I think that it very much kind of goes hand in hand with some of the prolific deal-making territory, which is US of A, and especially standing in an extremely stark contrast last week alone, presented very much kind of the opposite views of the regulatory engagement or rapprochement with digital assets. So on one hand, in one corner, you had the position of Gary Gensler in front of the House Financial Committee, where he not only admitted to never actually having owned or touched digital assets. Mind you, this is a regulator that is staking his claim to having an SEC oversight over digital assets and crypto as a whole. And on top of that, he was also very much refusing to define whether ETH was a security or not. Certainly a very entertaining feed to watch, but one that potentially also causes quite a lot of frustration, understandably, from our space. On the opposite and on the other side of the Atlantic, we had European Parliament passing MiCA, which is the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation Framework. That has passed overwhelmingly with 517 votes in favor, 38 against, and about 18 abstentions. So overwhelmingly in favor. Now, what MiCA does, and we'll be certainly talking about MiCA as a lot of the elements of that legislation are getting defined, particularly as they are engaging projects and founders in the space for the appropriate comment period. But what it does, it allows for all of one of the largest markets in the world, that is European Union, will have effectively a unified approach to all of the crypto asset regulation for all of its 27 member states, making it possible for one firm to essentially get passport rights. Passport rights have been tremendously important in the asset management space. As many of those that are in private markets active in the European markets can appreciate. Essentially incorporating in one allows you to give pari passu rights to engage and move capital freely into other jurisdictions without any additional hurdles. Same would apply here in digital assets. Now, it is also very important, I think, misunderstood a little bit by at least some of the press coverage that I've seen in the US, is to understand the timelines. So this bill essentially will get published in about 20 days in the European Journal of Rights. And as a result, we'll start essentially a clock for when the clauses will become enforceable. Probably the one that's earliest earliest enter into the law will be Title IV. That is what is essentially considered the e-money tokens. Regulating and providing actually guidance to the stablecoin market. That one is expected to be already promulgated in about 12 months. So think of it as start of Q2 next year. Followed very shortly in about 18 months from today by Title III, which gives a much more thorough authorization to offer asset reference tokens to the public. Essentially think of it as like a really good go-to guide for issuing any assets on chain. And why is that important? Because all of a sudden there will be a framework of clarity. So my secret hope, maybe to kind of recap very quickly the segment, is that we will hopefully see potentially a precedent whereby EU will pave the way for a regulatory framework that hopefully will get followed shortly thereafter in the US. That is at least my personal hope. It has happened for gold ETFs in the early 2000s, where Europe were the first movers, shortly followed by US, seeing missed the opportunity. And so we're not giving up on US first, but definitely kudos to our European colleagues for the foresight.
Absolutely. And it's something we've talked about a lot. And absolutely, I agree that while it may not be perfect, it is something to start with. It is a framework. And just as an FYI for those that want to read up about it, that framework didn't just come about over the last week or 2 weeks or a year or last month or in reference to FTX or anything that happened. This has been going on for the last 3, 4, 5 years. And so there's a lot of work. There were commissions, there were subcommittees, there was lots of work that went into this. So definitely read up about MiCA if you have not already. If you are a founder or obviously an investor, read up about MiCA. And we'll be able to maybe possibly give you some information on that as well too. Lastly, before we let you go, we wanted to talk about some hot trends, things that we're starting to see pop up in the market. For me, one of the things that we're starting to see a lot of is a confluence of AI and digital assets. What does that mean? Well, everyone with a pulse has been able to see GPT, Chat GPT, Baby GPT, Auto GPT, AI agents, any kind of, you name it, it's got something there. You've seen, the biggest tech people in the world, Elon Musk and others, be very concerned about it. You've seen others on the other side be very excited about it. Now, why is there a confluence between this and between digital assets? Well, one, AI, very quickly here. requires a tremendous amount of storage. And so there is the theory out there that as AI continues to get bigger and bigger, that decentralized storage out there in the world of digital assets could play a very significant role with that. Whether that's Filecoin, Storage, SIA, and any other different projects out there that have been building, Arweave. That could be just a number of different ones out there that don't even know about or haven't even been built. And so keep your eyes on that. AI plus digital assets could be very important for storage. And also could be very interesting for the world of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. Could GBT also be part and parcel to the improvements made by decentralized organizations? So there's lots of things happening here. We'll keep you posted on what we see, what we hear, possibly what we also put our own capital into. Michal, you wanted to talk about xNFT before we go?
That's right. And mad shout out to our team at Backpack, developed by Coral. They're a Solana project that has come up with a fairly exciting new standard for NFTs, right now contained solely in the Solana ecosystem, but one that holds quite a lot of promise. One that I was able to play around a little bit as a result of this recent, very successful mint of the Mad Lads collection, but really being used as a demonstration of what is xNFT. Very quickly, X stands for executable. So think of it as essentially an operating system for the Solana NFT standard where you can interact and execute with that NFT. Essentially, today, NFTs in the Ethereum ecosystem has essentially a reference to the metadata stored somewhere on Filecoin, Arweave, or whatever the storage might be, and are not particularly dynamic. So it requires additional smart contract programming to modulate their behavior or their properties. Now, what xNFT introduces actually lines of code that are embedded into the NFT. So that opens up tremendously the design space where you can not only interact and build experiences involving these NFTs, but more importantly, also think of potentially software as an xNFT. So right now, I absolutely encourage everyone to check out the Backpack wallet. That is the first place where you can interface and interact with that new standard. To me, has really harkens back to the days of like emulator days, where on my Mac in college, I was able to fire up and experience some of the PC titles that otherwise I wouldn't be able to play. Here, very similar vibe of small, silly games, but ones that tremendously potentially unlock some great design and builders that are very much attracted to NFTs being exciting again and kind of evolving beyond just being the static JPEGs that they were known for.
I definitely remember the emulators when I wanted to start to play Mario Brothers on my PC back in the day. Love emulators. That's a great one. Give you a little bit of intelligence, a little bit of observation, some data points. Hopefully it makes you a little smarter, makes you a little bit more knowledgeable of what's happening out there. Again, this is Connecting Nodes. Myself and Michal appreciate you stopping by. We'll be back here in a month with more information, more data, and we hope you are well. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, or if you just want to talk to us. Take care.
Bye.